This week on the Walk On podcast. And so here you are, bright-eyed college student, college grad, thinking about the art world. What was that transition like of young dreams in this hip space, doing unique things to like more of a staid world of banking?
I quickly learned how to apply my love for the arts, for creativity, and then my passion for and just interest in technology. Blending those two pieces together, I was able to bring some of what I loved into the role. And I do that even today. Like every aspect of everything I produce has a creative element to it.
Well, hello and welcome to the Walk On podcast. This is the season 3 set of episodes. Excited to be bringing new friends, colleagues, people that I admire onto the show. For those of you that are just joining us, maybe for the first time or the second time, a reminder that I launched this podcast really a year and a half ago. The journey started about 2 years ago as I was thinking about what's next for me in the back, I'd say half, but not really half of my career, the back section of my career, and really trying to find things that move me, that I was passionate about, and realized that I love talking to people, found so many fascinating stories, and that's where the Walk On podcast starts. And where it comes from. And so this is learning from people about how they find passion, how they find value and joy in the work that they do, and just interesting conversations. So today is no different. We've got a friend who's really an exciting guest. Laura Gibson-Lamothe is Executive Director of the Georgia Fintech Academy. That is a leading incubator for the next generation of payments processing and fintech talent. I must say that she and I have traveled to Ireland together in that capacity with one of my clients, the American Transaction Processors Coalition. Laura, before we turn to her and welcome her, is one of Georgia Trend's 2024-25 most influential leaders. She's a finalist for the 2024 Women in Technology Woman of the Year Award, a 2023 Inspiring FinTech Female, 2023 Black Tech Awards finalist. And she's just had this amazing progressive leadership roles at companies like Wells Fargo, Protiviti, and Ally. And so with that, I welcome my friend Laura on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Just thinking about all the things that you mentioned already, it's really exciting times. And like you, I have a similar journey reflecting on my career and what really drives and motivates me and fulfills me from a passion perspective. And so I am in the right place right now. I am living the dream, as they say. Living the dream every day.
I want to really get into that in a second because I find your career arc really fascinating. So why don't we go back a little bit? Why don't you tell the audience about you, your background, and we'll get going from there.
Yeah. So many people do not know this, but I started off my journey as a fine arts major in undergrad. Post-graduation, couldn't really find my way as professionally. And so I ended up going back to school for my master's in graphic design. And when I was pursuing that master's in graphic design, I really was forced to focus on what were the things that I felt like I wanted to carry forward into my career post-graduation. And I thought I might want to be a curator at a museum. I entertained being a gallery owner. I sought out mentorship on both tracks and really quickly identified that there's not much money to be made in those areas. And I really wanted
lots
to make
of passion.
Money. Yeah, passion is put food on the plate, unfortunately.
Exactly.
And so I ended up, it's funny, one of my friends, his mother was a PMP certification trainer. She went around doing training for project management certification. And she also had government contracts. She was working with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. She also was working at the Pentagon with some sort of software update. And I ended up being able to like apprentice under her. So I started to think about alternative career paths. So that's what gave me exposure into project management. I ended up going from there into banking. My mentor at that time was telling me there's money in money, and navigating banking was going to be a real, quick way for me to really find my way and applying some of the things that I had learned from a project management methodology perspective. but then gain exposure and even financial literacy as well. So she was like, it's a win-win-win situation. I started off my journey at Bank of America and quickly realized that what you expect coming in isn't necessarily what you get when you're there. I was reorged about 17 times. I joke around in like 3 years. It forced me to see a broad variety of verticals across the organization, across the enterprise. And then I found my way into enterprise release management, which was a function that was managing anything that was going to production, front end, back end technology changes for the entire enterprise. That was an amazing experience for me. I found certain niches like home loans and insurance and e-commerce and other segments within the enterprise organization that I was able to align myself with and start to grow some subject matter expertise in. And a lot of my leadership, of course, had transitioned, moved off into other roles, working for other banks. And that's what led me to going over to Wachovia. And 6 months after my transition, I found out that we were being acquired and we were now Wells Fargo. And so I ended up working on another kind of transition team. And I got sucked into the M&A lifestyle. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was either being, acquired or on the other side of acquiring another business. And so
They all just wanted your talent. They just wanted your talent.
I know, right? They come for me. That's what it is, Michael. But like just the experience of having to like navigate the blend of two organizations and the operational, aspects of that really excited me. And so I found something that was of interest, but I was a little uncomfortable and and had some uncertainty going into those new roles post, transition. So it was definitely a exciting time for me in my career. What led me to my next role was some of my leadership left Bank of America and had went off to start this new bank called Ally. And they were, 3 months to 6 months announced a bank. They just had a logo and not much else. And so I had some exciting projects building new technology for the first time versus enhancing and making updates and configuration changes like I was doing in my previous banking roles. So it was really exciting times to be a part of something new. And then, as you start to get really comfortable, years go by super fast.
Yeah.
I mean, more gray hairs, more stretches, and just thinking about how fast the time went. I was there for a decade and I was looking for my next new thing and, my next challenge. And I moved off to work with Feature Space, which at the time, those conversations were fun because they were a service provider to Ally. And so there was some leadership conversation, can we respectfully take this person from you? And I embarked on that journey, which made, me move from Charlotte, North Carolina to Atlanta, which I am still so grateful for. That transition away from home, sort of. I was there for about, 15, 16 years at the time. Professionally, that's where I pretty much developed as a young person into a mid-level kind of manager. I started off as a business analyst, went to project management, program management. Now I was looking for more operational executive type functions. And so to pursue that, I had to make a decision to leave, which brought me to Atlanta, which created a whole flurry of opportunity, which led me to the Fintech Academy. And so during the pandemic, I had a moment of reflection where I had to think about like, what is it that I want? It was a challenge because I think there's a little bit of discomfort when you're navigating an organization. You at least have an org chart. You know what I mean? I want this particular role. This is my goal. I can, campaign.
You can see a path.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I know, like, the formula to get there almost.
Yes.
You're having conversations, your year-end review, some other opportunities where you're kind of forced to have those calibration conversations with leadership to see how you can get there. So to navigate it or pivot really externally was embarking on a whole new journey for me. Coming into the Fintech Academy, it's funny, I knew my predecessor back at Ally, actually. We crossed paths. He was working at Accenture and I was working at Ally at the time. And so we had crossed paths and he was one of the first folks that I reached out to since I had no connections here in Atlanta. It was a totally new space for me. And in Charlotte, it's a very small kind of hub. Everyone knows everyone. And when you start getting into banking, we're all very much, very tight knit, close community. But coming to Atlanta, I was like, I know no one. And here's this guy, Tommy, I haven't talked to in some years. And he took me out to lunch. He, provided connection and just helped kind of kickstart my network in a new city. And then a few years later, we crossed paths at an event where he was bringing some students in his role as executive director of the Georgia Fintech Academy to a conference. In passing, he was like, "Would you ever consider this?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is not in my vision board." You know what I
Right.
mean? I didn't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
this visualization of a career pathway that led me here or to this. And so I had to really have a heart to heart and think through, like, what is it that I want? Like, what is it that I feel like best feeds and nurtures and helps me achieve what I want to personally. And so thinking about all the things that the academy has done was one thing, but thinking about where could I help take this in the future was the exciting thing for me. So it was a no-brainer to take this role. And now that I'm on my third year, is no regrets. I'm not
Yeah.
looking back at all. And so the future is limitless, as they typically say. But in this role, it's very entrepreneurial in a way that there's a lot of initiatives that I can spearhead and get done. So it's really exciting times
Well,
and a great place to be.
well, that's exciting. And I want to get to the FinTech Academy, but I do want to take you back. You said you're not going back, but I want to take us back all the way to the start of your story. And so here you are, bright-eyed college student, college grad, thinking about the art world and couldn't be further away from banking and finance. So do you still have room for art in your life? What was that transition like of young dreams, being in this hip space, doing unique things to like more of a staid world of banking?
I laugh because when I was so junior coming into banking, I got pigeonholed into being the person that created decks. It was just decks and
Okay.
presentations. And even from a sales perspective, internally and externally, it was marketing materials.
Mhm.
And I say marketing very loosely. It wasn't formalized as it is, considered today from a marketing function. But for me, I felt like I quickly learned how to apply my love for the arts, for creativity, for visualization,
Mm.
and then my passion for and just interest in technology, user experiences, etc. Blending those two pieces together, I was able to bring some of my what I loved into the role. And I do that even today. Like every aspect of everything I produce has a creative element to it. Outside of maybe some email correspondence.
I've gotten some of those. They're fairly creative, Laura. So,
Yeah, I try to have some pizzazz on there, like, well, I do, but I'm always looking for innovative, ways to like enhance everything that we do. And so I have bought that in various stages throughout my career. I remember one of my leaders told me he was making fun of a presentation I put together when I came on board at Ally. It was so new, we didn't have like a recognition program. And so I was like, I'm going to create this recognition program. I put a deck together, a presentation, a few slides, but I really wanted to showcase like why this was important and why it mattered. So I had, and it's so funny because now we have like Canva and there's other,
right.
really innovative technologies to do this. But I remember searching the web for graphics and I came across a bunch that were like healthcare related. So it was like a woman that was like holding her stomach. And I was like, do you have a burning desire to recognize and uplift your colleagues? You know what I mean? And so they all laughed
I
and
love it.
enjoyed it. But, like I was able to
Yeah.
like use like my love for kind of just visualizing, different facets of a very simple and maybe a little bit complex because it was us embarking on our first, platform and our first technology
Yeah.
solution to do recognition. But for me, I was like, how do I really reach my audience? And to reach them, I felt like I needed to be creative and yeah, we can have a little sense of humor and joke around about it, but like it's an important thing. And so I love that scenario because when I was at Ally, that deck had come up multiple times. People were like, "Can I see that template? I want to use it for something else. I need to justify."
That's
Um,
fantastic.
yes, the burning
Yeah.
desire.
So I love that you were able to instill or find a through line for this passion that you had growing up and were able to
Mm.
nurture it in this new environment in a corporate setting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the key. It's like, how do
Yeah.
you identify ways to showcase your talents so that you can, gain momentum in your career? For me, it was, aiming for the next promotion or the next special project. I think also bringing a mentality of an athlete. I didn't mention I played 3 sports in college, so I'm super competitive. And so for me, I'm always thinking about strategy and I'm like, well, how do I get more
Mhm.
exposure? You know what I mean? To the people who are the decision makers at the next level. And so I was always thinking about certain ways to do that, but then how to showcase the skills that you have is extremely important.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and it is amazing. I find, and I played a college sport as well, and I find that level of competition. You do need to later in life find ways to channel it, and so healthy, and there are healthy ways and not healthy ways, but channeling it into work and finding areas to challenge yourself and being competitive. It's a powerful tool. I want to keep going to the journey that you shared and go to the career arc, but I'm just curious as I crack my voice there. I'm just
Yeah.
curious. As you came to Atlanta, you mentioned, meeting with somebody and starting to build a network. I find that fascinating how people go about starting fresh and building this network. Any key insights from that experience as you reflect upon it that you're like, man, I'm so glad I did that, or that failed when I tried to implement that in my networking process.
Yeah, I tell this to students all the time. So it's one of those like practice what you preach moments or reflecting back then. I definitely did. I leveraged heavily my close network, my first level of collect connections. And I was like, who do you know in Atlanta? Can you
Mm,
facilitate any introductions for me? This is like what I need or what I'm there for. And so they were, tremendous in helping me make that kind of initial reach. And then it was, leveraging LinkedIn, filtering on who's in Atlanta, asking people what organizations they participate in and would recommend for me to become a part of. And so I leveraged really those relationships were key. But then I had to put myself out there a little bit. So I think most people that know me wouldn't say that I'm a shy person. It takes a little bit sometimes for me to come out of my shell when I'm in outside of my comfort zone. When I was in Charlotte, I had spent so many years building a network. I
mm,
felt like I knew everyone. It got to the point where
yeah.
in Charlotte, you can walk, we call it uptown, but like all the banks are kind of like on the strip. And doesn't matter what bank you work at, you're gonna connect with someone that you know in passing. I would walk the streets and not necessarily see strangers the entire way that I'm commuting into work. And so I came from that environment to a place where I knew no one. And I was also working for a company that was, based or headquartered in the UK. So it was
Right.
it was a little bit of a unique situation. And so those relationships were key, tapping into the organizations and associations that people, recommended and referred me to, and then kind of leveraging those forums for networking with new people. And so I did that heavily, heavily.
One of the things that you said that really resonated with me was when you were telling people, when you were networking, you're saying, here's what I need, here's what I'm looking for. It feels like so often, and I'm sure you get them, but I get requests from people, hey, I'm out of work or I'm ready for a change. Can you help me? Well, of course, I'm happy to, but like point me in a direction. And I feel like people who come to the table with, hey, I'm looking at this company and here are the types of roles, it gives you as a connector something to shoot at that, oh, I know somebody at that company, or I don't. I know this person who does. So I thought that was really interesting that you gave specific cues to the people that you were networking with.
Yeah, and, I tell students often because sometimes they don't really know everything yet, so they're still
Mhm.
trying to figure it out, and I'm like, you do have to at least be able to guide the person you're speaking to, in the right direction, even though you might not necessarily say, "I'm aiming for this project management, 2 role." You can at least share the skills that you have and what type of function that
Mhm.
you're looking for, so there's always some level of information that you can share with people. And I think, in
Yeah.
the most part for my networking, even today, it's the same thing, but then it's like, how can I help you? How can
Yeah.
I help the
Yeah.
other person? And it's so
Yeah.
amazing to me to think about some people who, I don't know if you call it imposter syndrome or, just have a limited perspective, but everyone has some value. And for
Mhm.
some of the students that I work with, they feel like, oh, we don't have, 5, 10 years experience. What value
Yeah.
can I add? I have conversations with students where I'm like, most people that you're, meeting with, especially like on the recruiting side, they're trying to connect with this generation, and who better
Yeah.
to offer insights on that than you? For me, we do a lot of, public speaking opportunities and networking with the students. It's, they have their own passions, and, some of them want to be near peer, advisors, or provide some sort of tools and lessons learned from their personal experiences. And so I'm like, how better to network than to be able to provide that insight and that guidance? There's
Yeah.
many ways to help you.
What a powerful lesson. I remember when I was leading regional public affairs for Walmart, and I would do these media training sessions with store managers, and I would be getting them ready to meet with the governor of Florida or go on local TV, and they'd be like, I can't do that. I'm not an expert. I don't do this for a living. And some of them didn't have college degrees, and so they've earned their way to
Mhm.
where they are. And I would pause and say, do you run a $30 million business? Do you have 200 employees that you manage? You are an expert through doing. You have a perspective. Stick to that perspective, and that is valuable. So I think it's powerful what you're telling the students.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So let's pivot to the students actually, Laura. So tell people a little bit more who might not be familiar with the FinTech Academy, what it is, what it does, and what you're doing to, inspire and identify the next generation of fintech and payments talent.
Yeah. As you opened up with earlier, I mean, we're cultivating the next generation of fintech talent, and it's so exciting to see the success stories we've had coming over the past 5 or 6 years of the academy since it's been in its existence. But we are a university system of Georgia initiative, which means we work with 26 institutions, public facing to institutions from Georgia State University in Kennesaw and UGA to, Georgia Tech, and the list goes on. But we're offering not only curriculum, so students are, majoring, minoring, in some cases getting a master's in financial technologies, but then we also offer a very robust program. So we're doing speaker series twice a night each week during the summer or the spring and fall semesters. And then we also have a podcast where we bring students in to be a part of the conversation with industry leaders. We also do career fairs, hackathons, the list goes on. But every single touch point we have with students is to provide students an opportunity to learn or to demonstrate the skills that they have learned. So how can we get students, those opportunities, the exposure, and just kind of help, usher them into the industry? I think for me, as you heard with my journey, I fell into it. So failed in the arts. I couldn't necessarily achieve, $1 million, salary in the arts. And I had to reconsider my approach, or my perspective really changed through, networking and some outside influence. But I fell into fintech and into payments. And for these students, they're strategically already well ahead where I was back in the day, to the point where they're now seeking education at the academic level, gaining certifications, internships, just experience before graduation. And now they're embarking on their journey in the industry better prepared. I talk to a lot of industry professionals who are, 20 years, 25 years. All of it's been, on the most part, on the job training,
Mm.
and to say that, these students are learning payments end to end. They're learning, risk and regulation. They're learning, cybersecurity, data analytics, with a layer of AI and machine learning, of course, on top of that as well. And so they're coming out just uber prepared, I think, to tackle the industry and, the trajectory that the industry is heading in, which is fast paced, obviously, from a technology perspective. So really proud to see the effect that the program as a whole, curriculum, and all of those other moving pieces has played in students being successful on the other side.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting marrying of pieces here together, right? I was involved
Mhm.
in the creation of the Fintech Academy, and I remember having conversations where people were thinking, how do we get the kids sitting in their dorm room at Georgia Tech or Georgia State or Harvard who's thinking, well, I have to go out west to, go to Facebook or some cool company.
Yeah.
Payments, fintech seems kind of staid, right? So it was this, how do we create awareness and pathways for people? But what you said was my experience as well. I fell into communications and politics and public affairs. I didn't have anyone guiding me. And I'm curious. I'd be curious to know what the data is and generationally if that's changed. But I know a lot of people who just fell into their career. So it's this interesting marrying of creating pathways for people and then letting them find their direction based on, oh, that's possible. I didn't know that was there.
Mm. Just thinking about what you just said, and first, plug for yourself and for ATPC, the American Transaction Processors Coalition. You know, the the forward thinking that had to happen back then to identify that there was a need for something like this. I mean, just thinking about the global, obviously, you also opened up with we've been to Ireland together, the
Yeah.
global conversations we've had. I'm, going to visit some friends at University of Utah tomorrow, actually in Salt Lake City. And so the fintech education component is taking the world by
Mhm.
storm. And so the line of sight that, you and other leaders had to have to think, hey, there's a need for this. And now, where we've come, which is, being able to educate and provide, support to thousands of students annually and help place them somewhat also locally from a geo perspective. We are placing them also locally and across the US as well. There's a layer of, you know, what do they call it, sustainability or
Mm.
on the other side for folks to be successful in their roles, they kind of have to know what they're getting into. And I think, one of the things that I demonstrated with my previous experience was it wasn't until post graduation that I found out this like huge aha moment where I'm like, this is not really what I want.
Yeah.
It's an unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
From an academic perspective, it's a huge investment to make
Yes.
for these students. And so the better we prepare students, I think the better they will be on the other side as well in the retention and maybe even the longevity of their careers in the specific niche, which is one thing
Yeah.
I would love. I'm a data person too. And so when you mentioned that, I got really excited because I was like, I would love to see if we can do a comparison between, the
Yeah.
folks that are, especially now, because we're seeing this huge wave of like retirees coming in the past couple of years. And it feels like it's also trending upwards going into 2025. But now we have, folks within this industry, which is so super complex. Payments is super complex. And thinking about, how I grew up in banking, I
Yeah.
saw all the archaic systems and the ancient coding practices
Yeah. Yeah.
and the horrible data management. I
Yeah.
experienced a lot of that. And those who are leaving some of these companies are taking that knowledge with them,
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately. So there's a gap and a risk there. But then also on the other side, there's been a huge push for, I hate using the word digital transformation and
Yeah.
enhancements so that they can keep up with this, the demand for cutting edge technologies, which is what, students are prepared for. So
Yep.
there's a balance there, I think, that has to be considered, and it would be a fascinating study. I might have to put that on the to-do list.
See, there you go. Added something to the roster. Yeah, and I appreciate the shout out. I mean, I think I'd love to claim some massive foresight, but it was really just listening to and for folks who don't know, the American Transaction Processors Coalition is a trade association for America's payments company, and it was just listening to our members really focus on what you just said. We have this aging infrastructure, this aging workforce. We need creativity to tackle the demands of cybersecurity risk and emerging AI, and we need new voices. And so, how do we get them
Yeah.
at the table? And so, as you were talking about building tools, right? I've done this for a long time on the public affairs side, and so it was like, okay, there's a need. How do we build a structure for that? Let's go find smart people who can help us build this out. And went to the university system of Georgia, and the rest is sort of history. So speaking of young people, what is one takeaway? There is a lot of, right, there's these generational rifts, right? Okay, boomer, and, the newest generation don't even want to pick up a phone. There's all this like beef, right? East Coast, West Coast vibe. What is one of the things that you really take away that's unique and inspiring about this next generation of talent coming into the workforce?
Hmm. I think the biggest thing for me is there's almost a misperception about the fintechs and the Googles, or the Facebook,
Mm,
excuse me, the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. And the students that we're dealing with now are, I think, embarking career pathways during a time of entrepreneurship, of disruption. They're excited to be a part of an organization that's growing. They want visibility. They want to be
mhm,
able to demonstrate impact and influence. They also are curious about entrepreneurship as well. And so we've had to like broaden the career pathways that we support, and then also at the same time ensure some sort of exposure and integration of those pathways into the programming aspect of what we do at the Fintech Academy. It's been key. And so I speak with companies large and small. Some of them are like, well, we're not, this company, we're a smaller company. We don't have the luxury of having A, B, and C. And I'm like, well, students are really attracted to the fact that you're out there doing these innovative things and, bringing to market some really, cool technology. And that's what they want to get their hands
mhm,
on. And they're,
mhm.
I don't want to say desperately looking for those opportunities to
Yeah.
really apply themselves and not start off like I just introduced myself working on decks and grunt work.
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah.
reality of my career journey. I wasn't fetching coffees for people, but I was basically doing the work no one else wanted to
That
do.
next step up. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so
Yep.
nowadays, I think also with the of evolution of AI and the leverage of generative AI, some of those activities and those tasks have kind of gone to the wayside, which has opened up the door for more people to focus on more value add work. But at the same time, students are really looking for those opportunities, and it's not necessarily, I think, what historically people would perceive those to be.
Yeah, and so as we're talking about misalignment and alignment of perceptions, I've often hear people as they talk about the incoming generations of the workforce that they want to work in flat hierarchies. They want to have all kinds of freedom and flexibility, and they want to be a president tomorrow. But what I heard you just say, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I heard you say is they're really looking to provide some sort of value on day one and to have an impact and to be part of something.
Yeah, I can't say there aren't any students that are like
Yeah.
that, that wanna be
Yeah.
president tomorrow. I've seen some very overly ambitious. We've had the conversation around salaries and level
Mhm.
setting expectations and, not going in asking for the world, being realistic. So those conversations still have to be had,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but on the most
Yeah.
part, I would say majority of the students that I encounter are driven, are highly motivated, are curious, and they appreciate that they wanna get out there and just get the experience, and it starts early. I mean, I have freshmen now that we're working with on, internships and trying to apply for internships in a very competitive, market, and so they're just really looking for the opportunity to
Ready to
demonstrate,
go.
yeah, skills, so yes.
Yeah. So I want to be thoughtful of your time and appreciate it today. So a couple last questions. So you have a lot going on. You've had this really sort of iconic career. How do you stay fresh and motivated?
Mhm. I would say conversations like this really motivate me, and I have a lot of them. I would say I allocate at least like 20% of my time. I have the luxury of being the sole, person that kind of determines the allocation of what I'm working on and my focus. Unfortunately, I've learned that's also a bad thing. Regards.
I want to go do
So
that.
I wanna do everything, and so I end up working like 60 hours a week, but I do,
Yeah.
allocate time to having conversations that replenish me because I feel like I'm really focused on giving out and impacting and influencing, but at the same time, I need to, like, take care of myself and, it motivates me to talk about what I'm doing. It
Mhm.
motivates me to gain, obviously, I already know you, Michael, so I've had your support the entire time I've been in this role. But like having the support from the community, the industry has been, extremely rewarding to be able to plug in people. I have previous managers that I've worked for that have come and spoke with students. And that is, full circle, just amazing to see that cycle of, I met this person 15 years ago when I
Yeah.
was a junior project manager. And so being able to do that really, feeds me. And then also getting out in the industry. I go to many industry events, conferences. I was just looking at my calendar for 2025. I think I'm gone like at least every single month this year. So
Yeah.
the year is packed, but like having those conversations, continuing to network, meet with other people that can help contribute to the program and what we're doing, can help, even connect or hire students, internships or full-time placement. All of those opportunities come through a lot of the conversations that I have. So I would say, my focus has really been on, having those conversations in a meaningful way and continuing to do that.
So I said two more questions. I'm going to throw in a bonus question
Oh,
before I get to the last one. The last one is boilerplate that I ask everybody about. How we'll get to that in a second. But something you said, struck me. I often feel like, when people newer in their career or at a different place than me, ask for advice, or I sort of volunteer it on the, it sort of feels like when I was a boy, we walked uphill both ways, sort of thing. How do you balance that conversation? How do you have an authentic conversation with someone about, look, this is what you ought to be thinking about? How do you break through? How do you get their attention instead of just sounding like, all right, I'm just, there's the old guy over there telling me what I should do again. How do you
yeah.
balance that?
It's I always like to have some sort of supporting evidence, artifacts,
Mhm.
documentation. To me, I'm such a data-driven person, even though I'm very creative and visual. I love data. And I'm like, data guides, it informs a lot, especially for our students, because the questions that I get are like salary negotiation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, back in my day, we had very limited, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
You
Like
took what
now
they
you
gave you.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so now there's so many different tools out there, and it's not just me saying it. You can,
Mhm.
Google it yourself. But, for me, it's really about like providing the exposure to that and having that conversation realistically. I'm here to help. I'm not really trying, there's
Yeah.
nothing for me to gain and hindering you.
Yeah.
I want the best for you, but I don't want you to miss out on this opportunity because you overshot or, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so having those realistic conversations and being just authentic is the biggest thing.
I'm not gonna lie, I felt it right here when you were like, artifacts, after I just said the old guy in the corner. So thanks. I'm in a museum somewhere. Thanks, Laura. So
Indiana Jones, yes.
last question for real. What advice would you give others that are pursuing or trying to find their passion?
Yeah. It's so funny because I feel like one practice that has really worked for me that I used early on in my career and I use it every now and then is kind of just drafting out my vision board. And I use the vision board statement sometimes in jest, but literally I have a vision board. And I think this also goes back to the athlete in me. I always have been very, motivated and driven and even competitive, but there were certain things that I had like put on this board and it wasn't necessarily like just this job title or, this specific company, but it was like, what are the skills I want to cultivate?
Mm.
And who demonstrates these things that I
Mm.
wanna, end up demonstrating myself? Like,
Yeah.
are there people out there doing it that I need to, become best friends with, network with, replicate some of what they're doing in some way? And so it's always been about kinda capturing that and doing kind of reflecting type of I wanna say, like, itemization, but just like kind of
Mm.
focusing on where am I?
Yeah.
What am I excited? What excites me? Is it this particular project? Is it, certain technologies? Is it certain results? Because I'm also driven by successes.
Mhm. Yes, competitive. We got it.
Yes, yes, competitive, competitive, competitive. And so I'm like, having these things documented kind of just
Yeah.
like help me navigate things because it's like putting together visually pieces of a puzzle, and then you can
Mhm.
really determine and really kind of dissect what you have captured. And I think that's what really drove me in the direction that I am in. which was I quickly learned that back when I was working in banking, I wanted to influence technology that actually got into users' hands. I wanted to be
Mm.
able to develop and, innovate and optimize certain processes that really impacted customers. And I wanted to see, you know, awards. I wanted to see the recognition for our brand. I wanted to see, customer satisfaction scores. I wanted to
Yeah.
see social media comments even because I did end up monitoring that for some time when I was at Wachovia/Wells Fargo. But like all of those things really kind of drove me in that direction. And over time it evolved. So the
Yeah.
next time I get my vision board, I'm like, hey, I just did this, I was in this function for 2 years. What works, what doesn't work, and
Mhm.
what did I just get exposed to that was different that I'm excited about or curious about. And
Yeah.
so it's a ever evolving vision board. And now my vision board, you mentioned kind of the art. My vision board is a little bit less official and, less about title and job and
Mhm.
role. And it's more about impact. The impact
Yeah.
is what drives me. Now I'm like, our numbers are, 10 times where they were last year. My goal, I'm very aggressive, but my goal is to reach,
I'm shocked.
10,000 students. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and it's not necessarily just like the numbers, it's about the success stories and the
Yeah.
demographics of who we're impacting. All of that has now made it on my vision board.
I love it. I want to double click something you said. I believe I'm as part of this journey. I went back to school and I'm finishing up a program at Brown University as an executive leadership and performance coach. And one of the things I articulated that I really want to call out for people, we do this what I call a values wheel, where we walk through people through an exercise to really hear them identify for themselves what their values are, so they
Mm.
can, as they're tackling challenges or looking at new opportunities or their vision board, how does that align with your values? And one of the things we ask them to do is, who are the people you look to, right?
Mm.
Who are the people, the role models you see, as you just articulated, right, Laura? And so having people think about that, who is that person? What do they read? What do they value? How do they approach these things? It's a helpful model because you find value in the things that person does. And so you're
Mhm.
aspiring to do those things. And I just think it's an important tool. And so maybe they're not on the vision board because that might be creepy, but
Yeah.
the visioning them and who they are and how they approach things, I think is just such a powerful opener for the opportunities in our mind.
No, it's so true. Yeah, like, while the person might not make it on my vision board, their ability for, public speaking, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Their ability formalize partnerships, strategic partnerships. Like, those things are what is, like, really easy to call out, and then to your point, it's easier to measure when you have something to measure
Mhm.
against. And so to
Great
loosely
point.
say you just want something, ambiguously, being more tactical helps provide you some insights into how you're doing and how you're succeeding getting there.
I love it. Measuring against something to measure against, measuring with something to measure against. Really powerful. Well, Laura, it's always a pleasure to see you. I'm sure I'll see you in a couple of weeks, but thanks for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And this is the Walk On Podcast, people leading with passion and purpose, providing a roadmap for your personal journey. Hear their stories, find your passion, walk on. Thanks again, Laura.
Thanks.
Well, I was hanging